Hello. Oh my gosh, you guys. Okay, so those of you who have been here for a really long time will remember that we had this phenomenon back in the day called Friday in Trumpland. And I had a moment this morning where I was very much like, here we are again. Okay, so welcome. It's Resistance Live, it's ECM. I'm glad you're here. Ooh, let me turn off my banner for our friends with closed captioning needs. Okay, it's Friday, September 8th, and I am ECM. Welcome to Resistance Live. Today I am wearing a white mock turtleneck thing with a sweater over top. It's still a little cool here this morning. My hair is down today. I have my gold hoop earrings in. I am a pink-skinned woman. I'm coming to you, as always, from occupied Tongva land in Southern California, and my pronouns are she, her. What a morning we have had so far. Okay, so just to kind of recap, and we knew this was coming, but the special grand jury report that was issued earlier on this year has been released in unredacted form this morning. Those of you who have been here for a while will remember that there were two grand juries impaneled in Georgia. One was a purely investigative grand jury. That was the one that issued a report that came out in redacted form earlier this year. And then there was the grand jury that actually issued the indictments. Well, today, thanks to the judge, we got the unredacted grand jury investigatory report. And holy cow. I mean, okay, we're still processing this because it only dropped about 45 minutes ago, but I want everybody to be really aware that this is quite the bit of breaking news. So the short version of this is that the investigatory grand jury recommended the indictment of 39 people. I'm going to remind you that in the current set of indictments, Fani Willis has opted to indict 19. Now, there are reasons for this. Sit tight, some of which we know and some of which we can only speculate about. But among the folks who were recommended for indictment were Senator Lindsey Graham, former Senator Kelly Loeffler from Georgia, former Senator David Purdue from Georgia, Michael Flynn, Cleta Mitchell, who of course is one of Trump's attorneys, and Boris Epsteyn. So again, we have kind of a very interesting conflagration of people here. And then there are additional people who were recommended for indictment who we know for a fact have flipped. Okay. And those include two more minor witnesses that we know have flipped because they were called as witnesses by Fani Willis in the hearing involving Mark Meadows' removal case. So one of the big questions that is outstanding here is whether or not some of the people who were not indicted out of the 39 that were recommended have now turned state's evidence against Donald Trump or other of the named defendants in the current set of indictments. This is kind of anybody's guess. Now, I'm going to tell you from a speculative standpoint, I think it's highly unlikely that either David Purdue or Kelly Loeffler have flipped. I think that, in fact, there may have been a strategic decision on the part of Fani Willis to not indict them yet because of the political implications of a state district attorney indicting two state senators from the opposing party. I have to remind everybody, though, because somebody already said this in response to me on Threads, what a big deal. These people were named and there's no consequences yet again. Okay, hold up. Those of you who have been here for a while are aware that there can be such things as superseding indictments, meaning indictments that add new defendants, and there can also be separate indictments that indict others, okay? The mere fact that not everybody who was recommended to be indicted by the investigatory grand jury has been indicted yet does not mean that they will never be indicted, all right? And also, we don't really have any idea whether any of these folks are cooperating or not, other than the ones that we currently know about, all right? So I don't want anybody to like dive straight off the bitter and cynical cliff with regard to who's been indicted so far, because the reality is that we don't know what the story is going to be here with regard to these other indictments. And I want everybody to also just be clear that it's quite possible that they could be indicted under separate crimes. So let's just talk for a second about what we know about what the special grand jury was investigating, all right? Because there's some breaking news this morning, and essentially what turns out to be the case is they voted on 7 separate categories of evidence. This gives you an idea, by the way, of how broad the scope of this investigation was. Okay. So here are the 7 separate categories of evidence that the special investigative grand jury, not the indicting grand jury, the investigatory grand jury voted on. The first was Donald Trump's January 2nd of 2021 phone call to Brad Raffensperger. That was one category. Second category was a more generalized category of pressure placed on Georgia officials by others, all right? Third category was false statements regarding Georgia state legislative hearings. Okay, so it appears that at least some of these folks lied to the Georgia state legislature. Fourth category was, why can't I read this? Oh, I can't read my notes on this. This is hilarious. Okay, the 5th category is fraudulent electors. I know that. The 6th category is Coffee County. The 7th category is a generalized national bid to overthrow the 2020 election. The 4th is, can I even read this? What does this say? That's really bad. I can't read what my notes say at all here. All right, I'm going to see if I can figure this out by the time we get here. Intimidation of election officials, Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. All right, so that's category 4. So all 7 of these categories were separate investigatory categories by the investigatory grand jury. Now, one of the things that may affect how this series of indictments have gone down so far and whether or not future indictments may be looming is that there was not a uniform vote on all 39 of these people who were recommended for indictment. In fact, 7 of the grand jurors dissented to indicting Lindsey Graham. 6 of the grand jurors dissented to indict Kelly Loeffler. Okay, and again, I got to remind you, this is a recommendation to indict, not a direct indictment. All right, so we have a bunch of different things going on here in the context of what the grand jury was investigating. And also, I'm just going to say that I think the 2 categories of these that seem to perhaps be a harder case to make out by Fani Willis are a generalized pressure on Georgia officials and a national bid to overturn the 2020 election. Part of that is because, Georgia is investigating conduct that took place in the state of Georgia, and also because a more generalized pressure on Georgia officials is kind of a nebulous category to investigate, all right? Of course, as we know from the indictment that was actually issued, which is still sitting here on my desk in all of its glory, did include inducement to get public officials to violate their oath of office, all right? If the pressure that was placed was not that explicit, it may be the case that the determination was made that the indictment wasn't worth it. So we've got a whole bunch of potential issues in play here about why these various other folks have not been indicted. And I have to make this very clear, yet. This is not done and donezo for all time. And I feel like I cannot repeat that often enough. All right. However, in any other realm, something like this would destroy a politician's future career prospects. David Purdue has already run twice and lost after being a senator. Kelly Loeffler has also run and lost. As everybody knows, our 2 senators from Georgia now are Reverend Warnock and John Ossoff. We're very lucky that in special elections, both of them have prevailed. And we can be grateful that 2 of these 3 senators are no longer in power. However, I'm just going to remind everyone, all right, that Lindsey Graham's behavior over the last little while has been questionable, to say the least. We've had various moments where he's been weeping on Fox News about the potential threats to Donald Trump. And then we've had a fair amount of radio silence in recent months from Lindsey Graham. Ordinarily, if we were reading tea leaves, we would say the radio silence might be indicative of something. But, I got to say here, it truly is anyone's guess whether he's cooperating or not. I have big questions about whether or not he would do that. We all know in our experience that Lindsey Graham tends to be somebody who covers his own ass at all costs. If he was under threat of indictment or imprisonment, he might be cooperating. I think we have a lot of looming questions at this point about what this investigative report means, and also what its impact is going to be going forward. But what I will say is that it is no small thing that an investigatory grand jury that was impaneled for the better part of 2 years recommended the indictment of all of these officials. And it's a scandal in and of itself, leaving aside the potential prosecution of any of these people. So this is truly like a bomb dropping after multiple bombs dropping in light of the attempts to overturn the 2020 election. And apart from anything else, the reporting on this continues to develop. Like I said, it was only released about 45 minutes before I went on the air. So we're going to have more news about this today, obviously more analysis. I want to remind everyone that great minds can differ on this. You're going to hear a lot of legal opinions about what this means today. Please just remember that no one really knows why Fani Willis has decided to take this course of action. There can be a lot of speculation. I will say that I said it earlier in the broadcast. I'm just going to say it again. I do think there is a particularly noxious way in which a state district attorney indicting 2 former state senators could be perceived as political. And that may have some bearing on this. But all that said, no, I'm going to just say this, Janice. I've said it again. I'm going to say it now. Nobody should be disappointed because this story isn't over yet. All right. We don't know whether or not anybody has flipped. We don't know whether or not further indictments may be forthcoming. And, frankly, I think that if I were Lindsey Graham and I had not flipped, I might be shaking a little bit in my boots this morning, along with everyone else. Now, Mike Flynn doesn't scare easily about anything. Boris Epsteyn is Boris Epsteyn. But, I got to say, sitting senator, 2 former sitting senators wouldn't be feeling very great this morning about this particular turn of events, unless, of course, they're cooperating, in which case they've probably got a deal locked up already. So it's a lot. This is a lot, and it's a lot to process. And I also have to say that for those of us who were like, why is it taking so long? Why is it taking so long? Why is it taking so long? Of which I was guilty. Now we know, okay? 39 recommended indictments. Not like against people, like 39 people were recommended to be indicted by this grand jury. So this is a lot. It's a lot. And again, I think people are going to be processing this throughout the day. There are also indications, by the way, and I don't want this to fly over anybody's radar, that the special investigatory grand jury believed that certain witnesses had perjured themselves in front of that grand jury, which can also lead to additional federal charges separate and apart from what Fani Willis has already done. This is a lot. And, I think that we're going to see the media kind of breaking all of this down throughout the day with a lot of varying opinions and speculation as to why. So I'm giving you my first impressions here, and we may learn more throughout the day that kind of like leads to further and more specific conclusions. But at the present time, I think the biggest takeaway from this is that, 3 senators were recommended for indictment by a special grand jury in their attempts to overturn the 2020 election. And if that's not a history-making scandal, I kind of don't know what is. It's a very, very big deal. Okay. So yeah, we'll see what else develops out of that in the next few hours and over the next few days. I'm just going to mention one other thing here, by the way. The decision about a RICO conspiracy, I was sitting here thinking about this as I was getting ready, given that the RICO conspiracy is the foundational allegation inside the current set of indictments. I was contemplating why you would not include people who had obviously participated in furthering the same aims in an indictment related to this. And the political reason is potentially one. Strength of the evidence is potentially another. If the language that was used was hedgy, and they couldn't prove out a predicate act by one of these particular people, that's another reason. Flipping is a third. And then there's an allegation. I'm not saying this is a legitimate allegation, a speculation on my part that they may have acted out of the realm of the conspiracy itself. Like Lindsey Graham took it upon himself without, and this is highly unlikely, but took it upon himself without any help from anybody else to just place some phone calls because he liked Donald Trump or he was trying to cover his own ass in some particular way. I think that's very unlikely, but I think we're going to learn more. And, we're not going to know everything that Fani Willis took into account in making this decision to do this set of indictments now, but I don't think anybody's off the hook. And, I'm going to remind everybody that even if people have flipped and cut a deal, those deals are always contingent on their continued cooperation and often on their testimony at trial against other defendants. So buckle up, I guess is all I have to say about that for today. It's a lot. This is an awful lot right now. Yeah, and this is a good point. I mean, Jen, I remember this too. Loeffler changed her mind after the riot inside the Capitol building and was terrified, I think, of what had happened with regard to endorsing the election results. So there also, one of the things that people should be aware of is that there are, and again, this would probably be too late for this to apply, but there are precedents under law that say if you withdraw from a conspiracy and you take an affirmative action to say that you no longer want to participate, you then can't be charged as a part of the conspiracy. Now, I'm describing this in very basic layperson's language. The law about this will vary from state to state, but that raises a very important consideration, which is, the issue of whether or not she withdrew her consent to the conspiracy, or any of them did, right? I think we have very big questions about that as well in terms of the evidence. So there's a lot of moving pieces at play here. And I think we're going to have to just wait and see how this all plays out. But I just have to say, it's a stunning morning. I don't really know how to overstate what's happened today, because it's like a very, very, very big deal. I still keep coming back to the fact that 3 sitting senators were recommended because all 3 of them were sitting on January 6th. 3 sitting senators have been recommended for indictment in attempting to overthrow American democracy, whether they've yet been indicted or not. It's like, I don't know, man, never happened before in American history. So, I have to remind myself, by the way, that there were people who supported the Confederacy who were removed from Congress after the fact. But we never saw people recommended for indictment. This is wild. It's just a wild, wild day. Okay. I want to talk about some other things that have developed in relation to Georgia, because there have been, prior to this big thing dropping this morning, this big is the understatement of the year, we had some other breaking news yesterday and last night that is also very significant. So Fani Willis has moved to protect the identity of any jurors that may be seated in Georgia in any of these trials. That is for very legitimate reasons. The grand jurors who were a part of the indictment were doxxed. We know that they have been threatened. Fani Willis has been threatened. Her prosecutors have been threatened. The judge sitting in D.C. overseeing Donald Trump's prosecution by Jack Smith has been threatened. People have been arrested for that, or one person at least has been arrested for that. So this is a very common sense motion that Fani has filed. And in fact, she's recommending that no descriptions of the jurors can be included in the media, that they will never be known by their names. They will only be known by their juror numbers. No sketches of them can be provided to the public. Again, every recommendation that she is making makes a hell of a lot of sense, and I don't actually think that the judge will deny this. This seems very obvious to me. Fani Willis also, I think everybody knows about this now, sent a scathing letter to Jim Jordan yesterday concerning Jim Jordan's attempt to investigate her and her prosecution of Donald Trump and his friends. That letter, by the way, I just have to say that I've written letters like that, and it was a great pleasure to read. I also just want to say that I saw someone last night. I'm not going to name this person because I thought this was really out of line, but I saw someone who used to be a very high-ranking government lawyer last night essentially tone police Fani Willis for being as angry as she was in this letter. Thank the gods that Joyce Vance came to her defense. Joyce Vance said something like, "Only a Southern woman would recognize how restrained this actually is from a Southern prosecutor." I have to say that I think Fani Willis was entirely within her realm in expressing outrage in the way that she did. I also think that it was extremely cutting, and it was well-deserved. And I'm sure that it probably didn't do anything to stop Jim Jordan. But on the other hand, I think she's absolutely right. He has no authority to investigate her. He has no oversight over her. There is no means by which any investigation by the United States House of Representatives over a Georgia prosecutor is ever going to be legitimate. And so, go read it if you want your daily dose of joy. All right. that's what I have to say about that. All right. Peter Navarro was convicted yesterday. Again, I told everybody this was a no-brainer. I predicted we were going to have a conviction by Friday. We had a conviction yesterday, late afternoon. He is now up for 2 potential years in prison. One, as I mentioned yesterday, for defying the subpoena to appear and testify. The second, for defying the subpoena ducis tecum to produce documents. His sentencing date has been set for January 4th. He is out until he is sentenced. There was a question this morning about the fact that Bannon has been convicted of the same thing and his conviction is up on appeal. And why isn't Bannon currently in prison? Okay, so let me just explain something about this. We have laws in this country against incarcerating people unnecessarily, okay? And if there is a possibility, now judges can do a lot of things here. People can be remanded without bail when they're convicted of a crime, all right? Here, where it is a nonviolent offense, yes, it's an offense against democracy, and I understand why people are upset about this, but there's an entire likelihood that if Bannon had gone to jail at the moment where he was convicted and then his appeal was successful, he would have served his entire sentence anyway by the time that ruling came down. And so from the standpoint of, and just like, again, I have to say this, I'm no fan of Steve Bannon, please don't mistake me, all right? But also, I think everybody's got to understand that there are protections in our criminal justice system that make sense, all right? And some of them are about the idea that you don't want people serving prison time if there is a concern about whether or not their appeal is going to be overturned, and they will have already served the entire sentence anyway, especially when it's not a violent crime. So I personally, I think Steve Bannon should be serving time. He was already pardoned by President Trump once. He continues to perpetrate incitement of violence left, right, and center. I don't disagree with anybody who thinks that, he should be incarcerated for defying the subpoena. But he's not, and that was within the discretion of the trial judge. Okay, so if you want to blame anybody for that, you got to blame the trial judge. All right, but I also see the rationale for not incarcerating him while the appeal is pending. Navarro's going to be sentenced on January 4th. It's anybody's bet whether or not he's going to go straight to jail or whether or not he's going to be let out pending appeal. And I just have to remind everybody that this is the second time we've now had a very easy conviction of a member inside Trump's inner circle who refused to show up and testify. I'm also going to remind you that Jim Jordan defied a subpoena. And other folks have been referred to the Department of Justice, including there were hints from the January 6th committee that they might have referred some of their colleagues over to the Department of Justice. Whether or not those people get prosecuted is up to the DOJ, all right? And again, I'm going to remind everyone that, the issue of subpoena defiance, while critical, is not as critical as prosecuting the people who were directly involved in overthrowing the government or attempting to overthrow the government. So if I was going to prioritize the resources of the DOJ and the FBI, I want those people working to indict Donald Trump, which has already happened, and to indict people in his inner circle, which they are continuing to work on. I have to remind everybody, Jack Smith's grand jury met again yesterday. They're not done. They're not finished. All of that, I think, needs to be directed toward the immediate looming threat of continuing violence and attempts to overthrow democracy. I think Jim Jordan is going to have his day, but I also think that people need to get priorities straight about this, all right? Because there's only so many prosecutors to go around, particularly in Washington, D.C. Okay. Somebody asked about when we can expect the removal ruling for Mark Meadows. So I thought we would possibly have it by the end of this week. I have to remind everybody that this is a very novel issue under federal law that we know is going to be appealed and is probably going to make it all the way to the Supreme Court. So I am not surprised that Judge Jones, the judge in the Northern District of Georgia, is taking time to write a detailed and lengthy opinion that crosses all the T's and dots all the I's, because that opinion is going to be the basis of significant line by line and word by word review by both the appeals court and the Supreme Court. Okay. That said, we don't have a lot of time to delay here, and I think the judge knows that. I think there has been already an indication of the judge's desire for urgency in terms of the demand for additional briefing on the issue of what happens if he was acting within the scope of his government duty in one element, but not in any other. Okay. I think that we're going to see something on it soon. And soon, I would hope, would mean by the end of the day today. But if not, it's going to be sometime next week, and we'll have to see what happens then. All right. Okay. Okay. Notwithstanding the good news we had yesterday that a federal court had instructed Greg Abbott to take the barriers out of the Rio Grande late last night. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which now holds the title for the most conservative circuit court of appeals in the nation, said that the barriers with razor wire that are killing and maiming people who are trying to flee violence to find a better life in the United States can stay in the river for the time being. It's outrageous, it's inhumane, and it's temporary. So it's while they're considering the appeal, I still think that it's outrageous. But folks should be aware that the good news that we thought we had yesterday is not any longer good news. All right. I was asked to talk again about Project 2025, which I talked about quite a bit a few weeks ago, for those of you who are here on the Patreon side of the broadcast. While we're here and I'm mentioning that, please don't forget to like this broadcast, subscribe to this broadcast, hit the bell notification, share it with your friends. Okay, you can share it anywhere. I don't care. There's a share button right below the video. And also, if you want to get in on the question feed before every broadcast, please head on over to patreon.com/resistancelive and become a paid subscriber. For as little as $2 a month, you get the question feed, you get Sunday coffee hour, you get other bonuses. And we rely on your financial support to keep this broadcast going and also pay my team behind the scenes. Okay. We talked about this a few weeks ago when the broadcast was still on Patreon all alone. One of the things about Project 2025 is that it is scary. Like, I don't want to diminish the fact that there is this, coalition of conservative groups that are preparing to overthrow democracy and seize power for all time. And I don't mean to be glib about it, but I also just want to point out that for anybody who has followed the long trajectory of the Federalist Society, the Mercers, the Koch brothers, Leonard Leo, so many of these other mega donors to the Republican Party, none of this should come as a surprise. Okay, there has been a decades-long effort by the Heritage Foundation, by these think tanks and these mega donors to fundamentally overturn democracy at the state and the federal level. And they've been at it for the better part of 40 years. Okay, so Project 2025 is simply the culmination of those efforts in terms of what we know currently about the planning. And I have to remind everybody, panic doesn't serve anyone. All right, outrage does not move the needle. And we know what we're facing down, all right? And I think it's also really important for everyone to stay grounded, all right? Terrifying people, particularly people who are not as invested in the political realm as we all are and this audience is not likely to get people out to vote. And I have to remind everybody, go follow Anat Shankar-Osorio if you have questions about this, okay? We have to appeal to common aims and common goals. We have to do the deep canvassing work that identifies what people really need, what changes their lives, what benefits they're seeking from government. Running around and, I don't want to be glib about this, but I think this point is really important, okay? Running around screaming about how there's a cabal of conservative activists who are about to overtake American democracy, even if that's the truth, okay, does not motivate people who are otherwise disengaged to get out and vote. And so I think that the way to perceive the Project 2025 issue is to say, okay, when people show you who they are, believe them, and then get to work. Okay, like I don't think it's not real. I know it's real. I've watched what these people have been doing for my entire life as an activist. All right, they're doing exactly what they have said they were going to do, and all of this has been public for a very long time. The fact that it's now got like a project name doesn't make it new. Okay, and at the same time, I just really want to motivate everybody in this audience to realize that you as an individual can make a difference. You can motivate people to vote. You can get out in your community and educate people in your community without being like overbearing about it, about what's so important about the upcoming election cycle. You can talk to your neighbors about what issues they really care about, and you can make a point of pointing out the ways in which a given candidate or a given platform is actually really working to benefit them on the issues that matter to them most. You can do the hard work of getting out the vote, doing deep canvassing, talking to your neighbors and your friends, taking every opportunity to do it. Again, those of you who were on just the Patreon broadcast know that for like 2 years, I've been telling people, talk to people about it when you're in the checkout line at the supermarket. Talk to people about it when you're sitting in the bleachers at your kid's baseball game. Talk to people about it at the PTA meeting. Talk to people about it when you run into them on the street walking your dog. Like, every single interaction you have is an opportunity to educate people about the importance of the 2024 election and to really help people start. You're just planting seeds, right? Identify what really matters to them and to get them thinking about who is really working to benefit the American people, all right? And doing this in really specific ways. And again, I have to point out, I agree with Teresa about this, talking about jobs, talking about the economy doesn't motivate people to vote. You know what motivates people to vote? Their electric bill, traffic, okay? Issues about education, issues about medical care, all right? So you've really got to get to a point of understanding that this is a deep and grounded effort that each and every one of us have to make where we live, all right? And yes, I'm in favor of things like sister district, and yes, I'm in favor of, like, you know, doing all the good work of, you know, picking up phone banking and text banking into other jurisdictions that need our help, but also the place that needs them where you live, all right? So it's really critically important to understand that. Again, I said this yesterday, I think I said it the day before, I'm going to say it here again. They want us terrified because one of the responses when we are terrified is that we freeze. And it is wildly important to develop enough of a backbone and an outer shell at this moment to the outrage cycle that when things like this break, your response is, okay, what am I going to do about that? And that really, to me, is the most sane way to handle it. And also, by the way that's the least likely to cause you mental and physical harm. Okay. Like, staying regulated through news like this or, you know, trumped up media cycles about things like this actually benefits not just democracy, but also yourself. Okay. So that's my little comment on that for today. All right. Speaking of local politics, I was asked to comment on this today. Orange, which is a city here in Orange County, Orange, last night did in fact pass an anti-trans school board initiative that requires teachers to out trans kids and non-binary kids who are using different pronouns than the pronouns that they're assigned at birth to their parents. However, a federal court in California yesterday, and if you didn't see this on yesterday's broadcast, go back and watch it, ruled that it was staying the enforcement of that ban in Chino, which is another city here in California, that said exactly the same thing. And so any court challenge to the Orange School Board's initiative is going to fall for the same reasons, all right? And I'm just going to point out that, and I know this for very personal reasons, the Department of Education regulations here in California do not allow for gender discriminatory policies by school boards or schools. There is affirmative law that says you cannot discriminate inside the education of the state of California on the basis of someone's gender identity. And because this is disparate treatment, where children who are using different pronouns are being treated differently from children who are using their assigned pronouns at birth, this is going to fall for equal protection reasons under the Constitution of the United States. It's going to fall under the California Constitution, and it's going to fall directly under California law. Now, it's going to take some time for those things to move their ways through the court, but we've already got one court in California that said, nope, this policy is unlawful. So I'm disappointed, and I have been on the front lines of this issue. I was one of the people who wrote parental letters to members of the Orange City. That is not my city, but wrote letters to the Orange School Board about this issue directly, and I particularly targeted school board members who were on the fence. I wrote very impassioned letters about this as a parent, and I'm disappointed in the result. But at the same time, I do believe that the courts are not going to enforce this. They're going to stop it in its tracks. And also, I just want to remind everybody that, as none other than the great Martin Luther King said, and as well as many, many other historic civil rights activists, you don't have to enforce the law if the law itself is unjust. And there are already teachers saying that they're not going to do this. Because they know it risks the lives of trans and non-binary children. So, we're at a breaking point on a lot of these issues, even in blue states like mine. And that is yet again another reason why you must get involved where you live. You must know who is running for local office. It's more important now than it has perhaps ever been in American history, because all of our rights are on the line. And I'm just going to say it again. It doesn't matter if you don't know any trans people, but you should. It doesn't matter if you know any don't know any non-binary people, but you should. It doesn't matter if you don't have LGBTQ plus people in your family. Bodily autonomy is bodily autonomy. And if you care about abortion rights, you should care about what's happening to trans kids, because it's all on the same spectrum. All right. And we desperately, desperately, desperately need voices of just like average folks in the community standing up for trans and non-binary kids right now, all LGBTQ plus kids, because they're kids and they deserve to be who they are, and they're being persecuted for political gain. And it's really quite revolting. Okay, that's the end of my little discussion about that for today. All right, somebody asked me to comment on the situation with Musk in Ukraine. So, all right, I'm just going to say this, like Elon Musk is what he appears to be. And the federal government very plainly made some very bad decisions when it reached government contracts with SpaceLink, which is Elon Musk's satellite company, to contract with the use of Elon Musk's satellites regarding troop movements in Ukraine and around the world. In essence, the bit of this story is that there was an urgent request placed to Musk to use his satellites as a part of a drone attack against Russia, and Musk shut down the satellites instead. And the result of that was that the Ukrainian troops got trapped. They had no communications. And he did this because he didn't feel like doing it. He's a profoundly dangerous individual. I really think I can't overstate that. And, this is one of the problems with the degree of wealth inequality that we have in this country, the fact that billionaires aren't taxed. He believes himself to be entirely above the law. He's acting like his own nation state. There's been a lot of reporting done on this recently about his whims and the way in which they jeopardize fundamentally global security at this point, given how much power he has. And my assumption at this point is that the DOD and the Pentagon are doing whatever they can to figure out a way out of this arrangement because of the risk that this one clearly unstable individual poses to national and international security. So that's what I'm going to say about that. All right. Okay. We have a lot of other stuff that could potentially break today. I just have to remind you all, again, still waiting on Meadows' removal petition. Donald Trump threatened yesterday that he was going to try to remove everything to federal court. I mentioned yesterday and the day before that if Meadows succeeds on removal, we would expect there to be a domino effect with some of the other defendants, Trump potentially being one of them. I don't know, man. I highly doubt that Meadows is going to succeed on removal in a way where the entire case is removed to federal court. In fact, I think the greater likelihood is that removal is going to be denied, but one way or another, it's going to be appealed and litigated. And then we have this grand jury report, man, I don't know. I'm sure there's been plenty of other discussion about it and probably even more breaking news while I've been here live for the last 37 minutes. So I'm going to let everybody go. I want to remind everybody that if you want to tip me, you can buy a super sticker here on YouTube. But also the easiest way to support this effort is to become a subscriber at patreon.com/resistancelive. I'm going to show you the banner right now. You can ask questions before each broadcast. We're going to be here live on Sunday morning at 8:30 a.m. Pacific, 11:30 a.m. Eastern for our weekly coffee hour for Patreon only subscribers. So if there's additional breaking news today and you want to hear about that, get in on that because I'll talk about it on Sunday. And also we are so grateful for our Patreon subscribers and thankful so much for all of you who back the broadcast on a regular basis, who help our very small team of folks who struggle on the daily to take care of our kids as single moms, as trans folks, to get support and medical care and everything else. We have a really diverse team here of phenomenal people, and we count on your subscriptions to keep this all going. It's not just me, it's everybody behind the scenes, all of whom I love and adore and are dear friends. So please head on over there and subscribe if you have not done so yet. Subscriptions start as low as $2 a month. That means every broadcast that you watch costs you like a dime or less, given that we're here 6 days a week now. So I'm very grateful to all of you. I'm wishing you all like a wonderful, wonderful weekend. And, notwithstanding the fact that we have a lot of excitement and there's a lot of adrenaline flowing this morning because of everything that's happening in Georgia, I do want to encourage you, as always, to engage in deep self-care as much as you can. Get out, take a walk. I realized yesterday at 3 o'clock, I hadn't left my house all day. Make sure that you are taking care of yourselves, because again, we've got so far to go on this. I know this is a good moment. It is a season of accountability, and I know a lot of us have waited a really long time for this, but please don't forget that burnout is real, and we have an election next year, and we're all going to need to be ready to cross the finish line for that, and we should be starting that race right now. So yeah, take care of yourselves. All right, much love, everybody. It's great to see you all here. Thank you all for your support. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this broadcast so that we can get it out to as many people as possible. And I will catch you all here on Sunday if you are a Patreon subscriber, or on Monday morning for everyone. All right, take care, everyone. Thanks for being here. Love you all. Bye.